if you've never dealt with an HOA Karen. Let me give you one word of advice. Don't assume common sense applies. Logic? Facts? Property lines? None of it matters to someone whose personality is built around enforcing imaginary rules no one agreed to follow in the first place. Unfortunately for me, I learned that lesson the hard way, but also in the most satisfying way imaginable. This story starts, as most HOA nightmares do, with something unbelievably stupid. In my case, it was a fence. You see, I live just outside of a well-known suburban HOA community. My property backs up to the far edge of their development, but crucially, and this is important, I'm not a member of their HOA. My address is outside their jurisdiction. My taxes go elsewhere, and my property rights are protected under entirely different local ordinances. In short, they have zero authority over me. Or so I thought. Karen didn't see it that way. Karen was the self-appointed sheriff of her little HOA kingdom, and from the moment she noticed my fence being installed along our shared property line, she decided that made me fair game for her HOA handbook. The fence wasn't just any fence. I'd spent months planning it, working with my county to ensure all codes were met, that the line was legal, that the materials wouldn't impact drainage or aesthetics. It wasn't even an eyesore. Think rustic wood, tasteful height, something you'd see on a magazine cover for modern farmhouse living. But to Karen, it represented chaos. It represented someone daring to exist outside her HOA's clutches. The first time she marched onto my property, clipboard in hand and phone at the ready, I genuinely thought she was joking. You can't just build structures without HOA approval, she barked, squinting over her dollar store sunglasses. I'm not in your HOA, I replied, polite but firm. You're adjacent, she snapped back, as if proximity alone gave her legal rights. That means it affects us. I calmly explained the situation, showed her the permits, even offered to share contact info from my county inspector, who'd been out just days prior. None of it mattered. Karen wasn't looking for facts. She was looking for submission. That was day 1. Day 2, she called the HOA president. Day 3, she showed up with a second clipboard and a camera, documenting every inch of my property like she was gathering evidence for a war crimes tribunal. By day 5, I received my first official-looking letter. It wasn't from the county. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was from Karen, typed in Comic Sans. On HOA letterhead she clearly printed at home. The letter was a masterpiece of suburban entitlement. You are hereby notified that your fence violates HOA policies regarding sight lines, material composition, and neighborhood harmony. Failure to comply will result in legal action. Neighborhood harmony? Really? I laughed it off at first, tossed the letter in a drawer, and went about my life. But Karen wasn't done. Over the next few weeks, I found myself the target of an escalating campaign of HOA harassment. Fake violations taped to my door, anonymous complaints to animal control about a dog I didn't own, even a bizarre accusation that my garden hose was polluting community water systems. Each time, I responded the same way, calmly, factually, with documentation proving I was outside their jurisdiction. Each time, Karen grew angrier, and then came the lawsuit, delivered to my door by a very embarrassed process server. The papers outlined Karen's boldest move yet. She was suing me personally for violating HOA policies and damaging neighborhood property values through unauthorized modifications. The complaint was riddled with legal nonsense, citing HOA bylaws that didn't apply to me, zoning codes taken wildly out of context, and a demand for immediate removal of my fence plus punitive damages. Most people would panic at this point. I didn't. Why? Because I knew something Karen didn't. I wasn't just outside her HOA. I was outside her league entirely. See, my career wasn't in construction or real estate or landscaping. It was in municipal law, specifically property rights. For the last 15 years, I've been helping cities draft ordinances, resolve disputes, and educate officials on the limits of HOA authority. I'd written the very rules Karen was now trying to twist against me. Her lawsuit? It wasn't just baseless. It was laughably easy to dismantle. But I didn't want to just win. I wanted to make sure Karen and her HOA enforcers never pulled this stunt again on anyone. So I did what any good lawyer would do. I prepared to end this not with a settlement, but with a lesson, a very public, very permanent one. Karen thought she had the upper hand. She thought a flimsy lawsuit printed on overpriced letterhead would scare me into submission. What she didn't realize was that her paperwork wasn't worth the paper it was printed on, and I had spent a career dismantling cases exactly like hers. The escalation began when her HOA board, clearly emboldened by her antics, decided to make this fight official. They called it a special meeting, which, according to one of my neighbors who attended purely for the entertainment, quickly devolved into Karen shouting over anyone who questioned her. In her mind, this wasn't about property lines or fences anymore. It was about principle, about control. She convinced the board to formally recognize her lawsuit, even though they had no actual legal authority over me or my property. She sent more letters, more fake violations, more baseless threats. And when I didn't immediately respond, she doubled down. One morning, I woke to find that someone I didn't need a detective to guess who had spray-painted HOA violation across my new fence in angry red letters. That was her biggest mistake. Up until that point, this had been paperwork and noise. Annoying, sure. Unwelcome? Absolutely. But now Karen had crossed the line from nuisance to vandalism. And vandalism? That's criminal. I filed a police report, of course. My connection to the local department ensured it was taken seriously, especially given Karen's ongoing harassment. But I didn't stop there. I began gathering every scrap of evidence, not just against Karen, but against the entire HOA board that had enabled her behavior. I compiled emails, meeting minutes, copies of her absurd notices, statements from neighbors she'd harassed over the years. I documented the vandalism, the trespassing, the false claims. By the time I was done, I didn't just have a defense against her lawsuit. I had grounds for legal action of my own. Karen's lawsuit proceeded exactly as I expected. A series of filings filled with half-baked arguments and misapplied legal codes. Her attorney, who I suspect was either a friend or someone she badgered into representing her, seemed increasingly exhausted each time we appeared before the judge. The judge, for his part, was not amused. During our first hearing, Karen showed up with a stack of HOA bylaws and a binder labeled Community Harmony Evidence. I showed up with a single folder containing my permits, property records, and a detailed explanation of jurisdictional boundaries. Karen argued emotion. I presented law. When a judge asked her how she intended to enforce HOA policies on a property not within HOA jurisdiction, she stumbled. When asked to provide evidence of any legal authority the HOA had over my home, she deflected. When asked why she thought vandalizing my fence was an acceptable method of enforcement, her lawyer quietly asked for a recess. It wasn't looking good for her. Meanwhile, I filed a countersuit, not just for vandalism, but for harassment, defamation, and the legal fees I'd incurred because of her baseless actions. I also filed a formal complaint with the state's HOA Oversight Board, submitting my meticulously organized evidence of abuse of power, false enforcement, and malicious intent. What Karen didn't realize is that HOA boards operate under strict regulations. They can't invent authority where none exists. They can't extend their reach beyond defined boundaries. And they certainly can't sanction harassment campaigns under the guise of protecting property values. The Oversight Board took one look at my complaint and opened an immediate investigation. That's when the dominoes really started to fall. Inspectors were sent. Audits were performed. Karen's HOA, already teetering under her iron-fisted rule, buckled under scrutiny. They found financial discrepancies, improper enforcement actions, violations of homeowners' rights. Within weeks, the state suspended the HOA's authority, pending a full review. HOA activities were frozen, meetings canceled, enforcement halted. Karen, who had styled herself as the neighborhood's unofficial queen, suddenly found herself stripped of her scepter. Her lawsuit collapsed shortly after. The judge dismissed it with prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile, and awarded me damages. Not a fortune, but enough to cover my expenses, and then some. More importantly, the ruling included a restraining order preventing Karen from contacting me, setting foot on my property, or attempting any further enforcement action. But I wasn't finished. Karen had tried to weaponize her HOA against me. She'd tried to turn a non-existent authority into a cudgel using fear, intimidation, and vandalism to get her way. I wanted to ensure no one else in the neighborhood or any future homeowner would ever be subjected to that kind of abuse. So I went public. With the Oversight Board's findings now a matter of public record, I attended the next county council meeting. I laid out calmly and professionally the timeline of events, the harassment, the baseless enforcement attempts, the vandalism, the lawsuit. I presented the state suspension of the HOA and the judge's ruling in my favor. The room was packed. Not just council members, but reporters, neighbors, even some from Karen's side of the HOA who had quietly resented her for years. The council didn't just listen. They acted, citing the investigation's findings and the public harm caused by rogue enforcement. They moved to formally dissolve the HOA's authority over the neighborhood, effective immediately. Karen's HOA no longer existed as a governing body. The bylaws she'd weaponized were null. The dues she'd lorded over her neighbors were canceled. In 3 minutes, the time it took to read the motion and record the vote, Karen's empire crumbled. My fence remained. My property remained untouched. And Karen? Well, she remained furious. But now, she was just another neighbor with no more power than anyone else. After the courtroom defeat and the HOA suspension, most people would have taken the hint. Most people would have backed down, retreated into their homes, maybe written an angry Facebook post or two before fading quietly into the background. But Karen was not most people. When she realized she couldn't control me, she turned to controlling the narrative. Her first move was classic suburban damage control. She began spreading rumors, first to her immediate neighbors, then to anyone in the surrounding blocks who'd listen. According to Karen's version of events, I was the one who'd harassed her. I had bullied the HOA with fake lawsuits and weaponized technicalities to take away the community's protections. She even said I'd threatened her with prison time, a complete fabrication, but one that spread fast among the elderly crowd who still thought the HOA stood for law and order. Of course, most people knew the truth by now. The county meeting had been public. The judge's ruling had been circulated by our local news site, and the state's official website still listed her HOA as dissolved pending formal audit. But that didn't stop Karen from throwing her last punches, even if they were weak and wildly off target. She began a campaign of petty revenge. Some mornings I'd find dead leaves and random garbage dumped just inside my fence. Other days, strange pamphlets were left under my windshield wipers, warnings about property values and preserving community character. I even caught her once in broad daylight, taking photos of my backyard from across the street. But she was more careful now. The restraining order had real teeth. She couldn't come onto my property or contact me directly, and one slip-up could mean criminal charges. So she became a shadow, a passive-aggressive phantom working just beyond the lines. What Karen didn't know was that every one of her actions was being documented. The moment the spray paint incident happened, I installed a discreet perimeter of security cameras. Front yard, backyard, side lot, all monitored and motion-triggered. It didn't take long to capture her tossing yard debris over the fence and slipping bogus flyers under my truck's windshield. But I didn't react. Not immediately. Because I wasn't interested in punishing Karen. I was interested in ending her. Not physically, of course. I'm no villain. But I wanted to end her reputation, her credibility, her false sense of superiority. So I waited while she ran her whisper campaign. I worked quietly with a few well-connected neighbors, folks who had long resented her self-imposed authority. We organized a community meeting, not through the old HOA, but through the Neighborhood Watch program, which was still active and completely unaffiliated. The turnout was massive. Over 60 residents filled the community center, some standing in the back, all curious to hear what was going on. I stepped up to the podium and, with calm professionalism, laid it all out, the full timeline of Karen's behavior. From the moment she stepped onto my land to the moment the HOA was legally dissolved. I presented emails, legal documents, photos of vandalism, and even security footage. I kept the tone factual, never emotional. I didn't mock her or insult her. I didn't have to. The truth spoke for itself. The room was silent when I finished. And then, slowly, came the applause. Not wild or theatrical, but steady, appreciative. The kind of applause people give when they realize someone finally stood up to the bully they've all feared for years. Karen wasn't in the room. She hadn't been invited. But word got back to her within the hour. The fallout was swift. Neighbors stopped waving, stopped engaging. People who used to nod politely at her during dog walks now crossed the street without a word. Parents who once tolerated her meddling refused to let her near their kids. Overnight, she became a pariah in her own neighborhood. Her influence? Gone. Her legacy? Embarrassed. Her carefully crafted image of control? Obliterated. But here's where it gets truly poetic. Remember how Karen always insisted the HOA was about protecting the neighborhood, about preserving community standards? Well, with the HOA disbanded and her credibility shattered, the neighborhood started doing better without her. Block parties returned. People repainted homes in colors she would have screamed about. Holiday decorations got bigger, brighter, louder. No more fear of Karen's code. Instead, there was laughter. Freedom. The ultimate retaliation wasn't something I said. It wasn't something I filed in court. It was letting her watch everything she tried to control grow stronger in her absence. But there was one final blow she never saw coming. Several months after the lawsuit fiasco, I received a call from a real estate agent. A mutual friend had mentioned I might be interested in a vacant lot, a plot of land just 2 blocks from Karen's house. Small, undeveloped, and cheap due to zoning issues. I bought it the next week. Then, using the exact legal pathways Karen once tried to exploit, I submitted plans to turn it into a community garden. Now here's the kicker. This garden, it was public, city-supported, open access. And the rules? Set by me, in full coordination with the local planning board. And guess who could see it from her upstairs window every single day? Karen, from her bedroom. She had a direct view of the garden's vibrant rows of vegetables and wildflowers, the benches where kids read books, the mural painted by a local art class that read, "Grow together, not control each other." She never came to the garden, never spoke of it, but I knew it ate her alive. Because nothing stings more than watching people thrive after you try to tear them down. Karen had been reduced from suburban tyrant to neighborhood pariah. Her carefully curated image of control and respectability was now nothing but whispers behind closed doors and subtle side eyes during trash pickup. But the most satisfying part of it all wasn't just her fall from power. It was watching her unravel, without a single finger lifted in anger. You see, real revenge isn't loud. It's not screaming matches or public blow-ups. Real revenge is letting someone implode under the weight of their own arrogance while the rest of the world moves on, happier, healthier, and free of their influence. Still, fate wasn't quite done with Karen. With her HOA dissolved and her reputation shattered, she tried to regain control the only way she knew how, by pivoting into politics. That's right. She announced that she'd be running for a seat on the local zoning and neighborhood development board. Apparently, she believed that with a bit of rebranding and a few phony smiles, she could worm her way back into power and restore order to our lawless neighborhood. Her platform? Return integrity to local housing. Her slogan? Protecting our property values together. Her real motivation? Revenge. I'd be lying if I said I didn't laugh out loud when I saw her campaign flyers. They were stuffed in mailboxes by some poor teenage volunteer who clearly had no idea who she was working for. Glossy pamphlets, professionally printed, featuring photos of Karen standing in front of neatly trimmed lawns, pointing assertively at nothing like a politician straight out of sitcom. But while Karen may have been delusional enough to believe she had a chance, the community had not forgotten. People who had once tolerated her for the sake of peace now had no reason to remain silent. Stories poured out, not just from my battle with her, but from years of petty fines, threats of lawn citations, letters for having a basketball hoop on the driveway, or wind chimes deemed too loud. One couple revealed she'd once fined them for parking their RV too close to community lines, even though they were on their own property. Another neighbor shared how she tried to ban Halloween decorations, claiming they encouraged suspicious activity. Her candidacy lasted exactly 12 days. At the next town hall meeting, a line of speakers, young and old, couples and parents, retirees and first-time homeowners, stood up, one after the other, and shared exactly why Karen had no place in any position of power. I didn't even need to speak. I just sat in the back, arms folded, and let the truth do what it always does when it's finally heard. She withdrew her candidacy the next morning. But my personal victory, the real revenge, came a few weeks later when I received a call from a local journalist who'd been following the saga. She was doing a deep dive on HOAs and the abuse of power in suburban America, and had stumbled upon Karen's now infamous failed lawsuit, and the HOA shutdown that followed. She asked if I'd be willing to give an interview. I agreed, but only under condition that the story focus on the importance of local law, community organization, and the dangers of unchecked HOA authority. The article went viral, titled, "How One Homeowner Took Down an Out-of-Control HOA and Won the Neighborhood Back." It painted a clear picture of what happens when entitlement meets accountability. Karen was mentioned, of course, not by name, but described vividly enough that everyone in town knew exactly who the HOA enforcer turned road plaintiff was. Her antics were immortalized in ink, archived online, and discussed in more than a few morning coffee meetups around the neighborhood. I'd officially turned her attempt at domination into a cautionary tale. And the garden? Oh, the garden bloomed. Neighbors contributed plants. A retired vet built a small wooden kiosk with seed exchange drawers. A group of teenagers painted flower pots and helped keep it clean for school service hours. It became a local landmark, a symbol of what could be built when no one was policing colors, heights, or imaginary rules. And every time someone asked who started it, someone else would smile and say, "You know that guy who took down the HOA?" But the final, most delicious moment of revenge came not through courts or articles, but through a simple for sale sign. One early morning, while walking my dog past Karen's house, I saw it. For sale, motivated seller, price to move. Apparently, the neighborhood had become a little too warm for her taste. No more HOA to boss around. No more board meetings to grandstand in. No more neighbors pretending to like her out of fear. Just silence, isolation, and the echo of a reputation ruined by her own hand. She left within the month. No goodbye party. No well-wishers. Just a moving truck, a scowling face, and one very bitter chapter finally closed. It's funny how neighborhoods change. Not just the buildings or the landscaping, but the actual spirit of a place. Once Karen packed up and vanished from our little corner of the world, the air itself seemed lighter. People smiled more. Conversations at the mailbox lasted longer. Neighbors who had kept to themselves for years began chatting openly about gardens, kids, hobbies, and weekend plans. What Karen never understood, and likely never will, is that communities don't thrive under fear. They thrive under trust, respect, and shared effort. For years, she ruled through threats and intimidation, hiding behind a paper shield of HOA authority. And for years, people allowed it because they thought they had no choice. But the moment one person pushed back, the moment I refused to be cowed by her petty vendettas and imaginary rules, it was like pulling the thread on a sweater she'd spent a decade knitting. Everything unraveled, and from those tangled threads, something better grew. The garden became the heart of it. Every season brought something new. Spring daffodils, summer tomatoes, autumn pumpkins. It was as much a community project as it was a symbol of what we'd reclaimed. Kids painted signs with cheerful slogans. Retirees tended the flower beds with a sense of pride. Even the city council praised it as a model of local engagement. Ironically, the very land Karen had once tried to control became the foundation of everything she hated. Freedom, cooperation, and joy without her. One afternoon, as I sat on one of the garden benches, watching a group of children chase each other between rows of sunflowers, I noticed a familiar car slow roll past a lot. Black SUV. Tinted windows. License plate still half recognizable from my many years of Karen-related complaints. She didn't stop. Didn't roll down the window. Just kept driving, slow enough to see the community garden sign, the painted mural, the people laughing, and me sitting there relaxed, smiling, utterly unaffected by her existence. In that moment, I realized she wasn't gone. Not really. Karen hadn't moved states away or started a new life somewhere else. She was still close enough to drive by in secret, hoping to see failure, and instead finding something thriving where she'd once tried to impose control. That's the kind of revenge you don't plan for, the kind that just unfolds quietly, beautifully, in full view of the person who tried so hard to prevent it. Her lawsuit had backfired. Her reputation had crumbled. Her HOA had been dissolved. And now, she was reduced to a ghost on the edge of a place she no longer belonged. Meanwhile, I became something else entirely to my neighbors. Not just a guy who fought the HOA, but a reminder that standing up for yourself matters, that knowing your rights matters, that community isn't built through fear. It's built through people willing to invest in something greater than themselves. I started being asked for advice. Not legal. I never mixed my career with neighborhood favors. But practical. How did you handle that situation with grace? What made you decide to plant a garden instead of suing everyone into oblivion? How can we make sure this neighborhood never lets another Karen take charge again? The answer was always the same. You plant seeds. You water them. You protect them from weeds. And eventually, something beautiful grows. Not long after Karen's quiet departure, the city finalized the dissolution of the HOA with a public notice. My property, once targeted as a problem house, was now a feature example in a civic report titled Homeowner Rights and Community Harmony. Lessons learned. I framed a copy, hung it in my home office. A small, satisfying reminder that facts, patience, and persistence had accomplished more than anger ever could. And the irony? Oh, the irony was rich. The same Karen who fought tooth and nail to keep my fence from standing was now permanently surrounded by fences she couldn't cross. Legal, social, emotional, barriers she built for herself brick by bit of brick. The woman who once wielded HOA letters like weapons now couldn't even get an invite to the local farmer's market without whispers following her like a shadow. In the months that followed, small details trickled in through the neighborhood grapevine. Her house sold well below market value. The new owners tore out her manicured hedges and replaced them with a swing set. They painted the front door bright yellow, a color Karen had once tried to ban for being too cheerful. The universe has a funny way of balancing itself. I think the final nail in her coffin came when the garden was awarded a modest community grant. Enough for new benches, more plants, and a small playground addition for kids. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the mayor himself attended, shaking hands, praising the neighborhood for its resilience, and laughing when someone joked, "At least we don't have an HOA breathing down our necks anymore." The laughter was light, but meaningful. A shared acknowledgement that we'd come through something ridiculous and come out stronger for it. Karen, wherever she was hiding now, couldn't touch any of it, couldn't claim credit, couldn't dictate how tall the sunflowers grew or how colorful the murals became. She was done, and we were just getting started.